RHOP's Karen Huger's legal team speaks on her conviction. The final chapter of Karen Huger's DUI saga is almost concluded. With the sentencing days away, the Real Housewives of Potomac's lawyers are speaking out ahead of the decision. According to recent court filings obtained by the Washington Post, both the prosecution and defense in the Reality Stars case have varying views as to how Karen Huger should be punished for her crimes. According to the reports, defense attorney David Martella stated, "She was shocked with embarrassment." He wrote, "She could not turn off the testimony or the body cameras. She could not get up and walk out of the room. The trial was a wake-up call." Following the trial, Huger completed a 28-day stay in a rehabilitation center. This coincided with the Season 9 reunion, which she missed. Following the completion of the program, Huger returned home, where her lawyers have stated she has continued her work by attending Alcoholics Anonymous daily. Additionally, her legal team laid out information about Huger's past of sexual assault while she was in college, which has had a lasting effect on her life. Karen Huger has had previous DUIs. Despite her attorneys steadfastly asserting that their client is making real progress and should continue on this path of recovery rather than sit behind bars, the prosecution feels otherwise. They are not convinced that she deserves to be let off the hook that easily. Jordan Kramer, the lead prosecutor, has stated, "The fact that Ms. Huger has repeatedly been given the benefit of another chance on 3 separate occasions demonstrates that she has not learned anything from her prior arrests. In fact, it appears as though she has been emboldened." Earlier this year, Robin Dixon alleged that this was Huger's 4th brush with a DUI. It has, thus, been confirmed by the prosecution. Karen Huger's sentencing is set for Wednesday, February 26. She is expected to speak at the sentencing before the judge. Last year, Karen Huger drove into a tree, leading to her arrest and conviction. Karen Huger's legal battle, the final chapter. The saga surrounding the Real Housewives of Potomac star Karen Huger had reached its most critical point. As the sentencing date approached, anticipation swirled around the courtroom. Karen, who had been a fixture on the hit reality television show for years, now faced the consequences of a series of troubling decisions. A trial that had cast a long shadow over her public persona was nearing its conclusion, and the legal world was watching closely to see what would happen next. The courtroom was full of tension as Karen's legal team prepared to make their final arguments. David Martella, her seasoned defense attorney, stood before the judge, preparing to address the court. With a calm demeanor but a palpable sense of urgency, he outlined the key points of the defense's argument, seeking a more lenient outcome. Martella's goal was to show that Karen's actions were not born from malice, but from a deep struggle with personal demons that had gone unchecked for far too long. Karen was shocked with embarrassment, Martella explained, addressing the court. This wasn't just a moment of poor decision-making. It was the culmination of years of unresolved trauma. She did not walk into that courtroom intending to make a spectacle. She didn't want to be there. She couldn't turn off the testimony, the body cameras, and certainly, she couldn't escape the weight of the situation. It was a wake-up call for her. His voice was steady, but the emotion was evident. Karen Huger, he argued, had been living in a state of denial for far too long. Despite her fame and success, the pressures of living under constant scrutiny had taken their toll. The DUI charge was just one manifestation of the larger struggle she had been battling privately for years. Martella had also presented an unexpected piece of the puzzle: Karen's history of sexual assault during her college years. The revelation sent ripples through the courtroom, though it was not entirely surprising given the complexity of her case. It was a sensitive subject, one that would inevitably impact the judge's perception of her life and decisions. It was clear that her past had shaped much of the woman standing before them now. Her past traumas had been buried for years, and they were only now beginning to resurface in the most unfortunate of ways. the rehabilitation program, and Karen's efforts toward recovery. In the aftermath of her arrest, Karen Huger had taken steps to address her personal issues head-on. She had checked herself into a 28-day rehabilitation program, an action that would prove to be a turning point in her journey toward redemption. During her time in rehab, Karen was cut off from the world, leaving behind the bright lights of the Real Housewives franchise and the constant pressure of the public eye. She missed the Season 9 reunion of the show, a move that demonstrated her commitment to focusing on herself, even if it meant stepping away from the very thing that had made her famous. Her legal team was quick to point out her efforts to rehabilitate herself. After completing the rehab program, Karen returned home to continue her recovery. Her lawyers emphasized that she had been diligently attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings every day, demonstrating a sincere desire to change. This, they argued, was the critical factor in the case. The woman standing before the court was not the same one who had made poor choices in the past. Karen had, according to her team, taken real steps toward healing. But even as Karen sought to demonstrate her commitment to change, the prosecution remained skeptical. Jordan Kramer, the lead prosecutor, was not convinced that Karen had truly learned from her previous mistakes. He pointed to Karen's history of DUIs, noting that she had already been given second chances on multiple occasions. Now, as the fourth DUI charge loomed large over her, Kramer questioned whether Karen's remorse was sincere or simply a convenient response to a situation she could no longer ignore. The fact that Ms. Huger has repeatedly been given the benefit of another chance on 3 separate occasions shows that she has not learned anything from her prior arrests, Kramer argued. In fact, it appears that each time she has been emboldened by her ability to escape true consequences. This statement struck at the core of the prosecution's case. The repeated offenses seemed to indicate a pattern that could not be ignored. Karen Huger was no stranger to DUI arrests. In fact, the prosecution had already gathered evidence supporting Robin Dixon's allegations that this was, in fact, Karen's 4th DUI. The number was significant. It wasn't just a single mistake or an isolated incident. It was a series of decisions that spoke to a larger issue with responsibility and accountability. A struggle between redemption and responsibility. As the prosecution and defense made their closing arguments, the question at the heart of the case seemed to be clear. Could Karen Huger be given another chance to prove she was worthy of redemption, or had she simply demonstrated too much of a pattern of bad decisions to be let off the hook? The judge, who had been listening intently to both sides, knew that Karen's case was far more complex than the typical DUI charge. The realities of living in the public eye, compounded by personal traumas, had made Karen's journey a difficult one. But the legal system was clear in its purpose: accountability, no matter the context. The defense, while presenting compelling arguments about Karen's efforts at rehabilitation and her genuine desire to change, could not erase the fact that she had already been given multiple opportunities to correct her behavior. Karen's prior DUIs weighed heavily in the decision-making process, as did the prosecution's argument that her repeated offenses demonstrated a lack of true remorse and accountability. As the sentencing hearing drew nearer, there was a quiet tension in the air. Karen, for the first time, would be given the opportunity to address the court herself. Her statement was awaited with bated breath. What would she say? Could she convince the judge that her time in rehab, her commitment to AA, and her long journey toward healing were enough to spare her from further punishment? Or would her words fall short, and would the judge decide that enough was enough? Karen's statement to the court. The day of the sentencing arrived, and Karen Huger stood before the judge. Her lawyer had prepared her well, but there was an undeniable nervousness in the air. The woman who had been so confident in front of the cameras was now a far more vulnerable figure. In the courtroom, she stood not as a reality TV star, but as a woman pleading for her future. With a steady voice, Karen began her statement. Your Honor, I stand before you today not as a public figure or a reality star, but as a woman who has made mistakes, serious mistakes, Karen began. I am not proud of my past actions. I understand the severity of what I've done, and I know I must take responsibility for it. But I also want you to know that I am doing everything in my power to change. I have worked hard, and I will continue to work hard to make amends and to heal. She paused, taking a deep breath. The trauma I faced in my life is something I've never talked about publicly, but it is a part of who I am. It's part of what led me to make the choices I've made, but I don't want to use that as an excuse. I want you to know that I am committed to bettering myself, and I will continue to fight for my future.